Chapter 501 Ancient Spirit 1. The wildlings all cried. The elite pirates cut off the wildling warrior heads without any expression and ended those wounded but not dead wildling warriors. More than 2,000 pirates had occupied every corner of the wildling tribe. Although there were still scattered battles, they were cleared up soon. There was a strong smell of blood over the whole tribe. The pirates were used to it, but the half-elves were pale. These half-elves had not experienced many battles, compared to the pirates who had gone through countless battles. Saran thought about something as he stood there. After a while, the Scarface appeared in front of Saran, leaned over, and said, "Your Excellency, all the rebels have been cleaned up." "Good." Saran turned and asked, "What about casualties?" Scarface replied, 78 died and 300 injured. "I've arranged for the injured to be treated." Injuries were still fine. Saran nodded after hearing the report. No matter how powerful his personal strength was, the pirates under his command could not avoid casualties. However, this level of casualties was still within his range, but it would affect his next plan. All according to plan. Saran took a look at the enslaved wildlings and said in a deep voice, "First, scout out the terrain nearby and set up a defensive line outside. There should be other tribes nearby. We should be careful of a raid in the night." Scarface replied, "Understood." Just now, there were obviously wildlings of different groups in the sacrificial ceremony. There were differences between the wildling oil paints, which seemed to belong to another tribe. Saran was not in a hurry to attack them but wanted ready to stabilize the area first. The population of the native tribe was close to 89,000. Saran could not deal with all these captives at once, so he was going to send all the dangerous ones to Mordor first. Because their evil god died under Saran's hand, many warriors of the tribe also gave up resistance. These warriors could not remain here because if they had the chance, they would be a threat to his pirates. They had to be sent to Mordor as coolies as they were too difficult to control. Some would be sold to the mainland as they liked these wildling warriors as gladiators. Treasure Island was filled with many minerals, but because there was no trade, the natives made the gold into various simple decorations. Saran's purpose here was to further increase his wealth. With the trade he had now, he could still support his ever-growing fleet. In the future, when the Avatar crisis broke out, all trade would be severely damaged. At that time, most of the income from trade would be lost, and these troops could only be supported by the resources of Treasure Island. This was also why Saran was so charitable toward the merchants that helped ship the half-elves. The reason was simple. The Avatar crisis would last for 2 years. It was not until the end of the time of troubles that the world slowly recovered. Basically, all chambers of commerce could only make money this year, and it would be very difficult for them to carry out trade in the future. Recently, with the increase in Mordor's population, the material need in Mordor also became larger. On the one hand, the merchants were busy delivering goods to Saran, trying to become friendly toward the Pirate King. On the other hand, they bought materials from all over the world and sold them to Mordor. Saran's reserve of funds was flowing out. In addition to grain and other important materials, other materials that could be stored were also delivered to Mordor. By next year, it was estimated that money would not be able to buy much. The chaos in the future would disrupt the production line. Their preparation now was for a chaotic future. Soon, large amounts of silverware and goldware were brought out. Scarface spat on the ground and said, "Can't believe these wildlings would have so much gold." "My lord, shall we attack another tribe?" Saran gave him a glance, shook his head, and said, "No rush. The important thing now is to bring these captives back. There are gold mines here. Soon, you will stay here to manage the manpower for mining this gold. I will let Giant stay, in case of anything. Be careful of the other tribes on this island, and never act carelessly." As Scarface previously lost at Snake Island, he nodded vigilantly and replied, "Understood." "Please rest assured, I will not commit the same mistake twice." Although Giant was the dumbest of many pirate leaders, he was powerful. Although he hasn't reached the legendary realm, His blood of giant gave him legendary fighting power. He had a good relationship with Scarface, thus staying here could frighten the other forces. After all, there were also other legendary creatures on the island. A day passed quickly, and the next day Saran arranged for some of the captives to be taken back. There was no need to leave too many people here as there were enough people to mine the gold. However, the strength of the garrison was still strong because there were too many dangerous creatures on the island. It was possible to encounter monsters on the route to and from Mordor Island and Treasure Island. Saran was not ready to go back to Mordor, but he would use the mutant killer whale to escort them back. In the future, he would use the mutant killer whale to control this territory, so as to push back other sea giants. Sea giants wouldn't simply go into the territory of other sea creatures. Chapter 502 Ancient Spirit Two Demonic Flame danced. A shaman priest wearing a bony mask mixed some black powder and sprinkled it on the flame. The rising flame burst instantly, and countless images could be seen vaguely. A special power expanded. It seemed that some existence was awakened. This power woke up with the ancient prayer, and then gradually integrated into the old shaman priest. Soon he closed his eyes tremblingly, as if he was connecting with some existence. Danger! Do not attack the enemy. Outsider. Very dangerous. Vague messages had gone into his head. The shaman trembled, opened his eyes, and said, "The ancients had spoken to me. Do not attack the outsiders, they are dangerous." In front of the shaman was a totem. It seemed to be different from the tribe Saran annihilated. This spirit did not seem to be emitting an evil aura and even seemed to have some wisdom. When the spirit was awoken, it seemed to be neutral. Everything was silent. In front of the shaman priest were a group of wildling leaders, who were the most powerful fighters in the tribe. However, there was a sense of fear on their faces. The combative tribe became silent. They had found out about the other tribe's destruction. Although their enemy had been destroyed, they did not feel joy, rather, they felt fear. After only one night, the enemy tribe they had been fighting for years had been destroyed. Even the evil god they worshipped had been destroyed. Fear and danger. After knowing this news, the oldest shaman priest decided to wake up the spirit of ancestors and ask him to give tribal guidance. Such a thing was truly scary for them. These outsiders could wipe out their enemies overnight. However, the spirit gave them a little information. In fact, the shaman even concealed some information. That was, the spirit told him that the enemy was very strong and dangerous. In case of a conflict, even the spirit could not defeat the outsiders. The best way was to move the whole tribe to another island. In that way, they would be able to avoid being destroyed. This spirit was wise. The shaman was fully conceived by the spirit. That was because the spirit they worshipped was not an evil one. The inheritance of ancestral sacrifice made them more rational. Although this tribe was not as powerful as the other tribe, they were much more civilized. They had better defense facilities, special blacksmiths to forge weapons and equipment, and tried to domesticate the raptors on the island. Thus even if the spirit couldn't give them the power, they were still able to fight against their enemies for hundreds of years. Now, a difficult choice had been placed in front of them. That was the fact that an outsider had appeared. To leave home would be to give up everything here and start again in a strange and dangerous environment. That was why the shaman didn't tell anyone else, because if he told them that, the tribe would soon be panic-stricken. Now, the only thing they could do was wait and hope that these outsiders would not attack them. The shaman looked somewhere far. He heard children's frolic and women's shouting and scolding. These poor people did not know that an unprecedented disaster was coming. The entire tribe was facing an unprecedented danger. They were busy in the tribe with Saran's memory. He quickly found the gold deposit. However, he still couldn't mine it yet. Saran needed to mobilize people and tools and must also act in secret because, until now, many of his people did not know what was on the island. They thought they were only coming to rob the wildlings. This matter could only be done with the people he trusted. These wildlings were pretty poor. Other than the gold, These wildlings had nothing else. Even the most powerful shaman did not have rare equipment. Their civilization was not advanced and only inherited some witchcraft. A week's time passed by. It took a lot of time for Saran to go back and forth, and he couldn't stay in Treasure Island for long. That was why many things had to be done all at once. Too bad. The half-elf first mate was in Raging Sand Island. With him, Saran could just leave things to him as his ability to do things was still pretty strong. The first batch of captives had been sent away. Saran ordered the village to be reconstructed slightly and got the cargo down. Half of the people stayed behind while Saran spent 3 days, leaving a teleportation beacon here so that he could teleport to support if anything happened. After the third batch of captives had been sent back, Saran was now ready to go back to Mordor. Nearly 1,000 people and about 2,000 captives were left on the island. When One-Eyed Jack came, the pirates under him became guards. The elite pirates couldn't stay here forever. It was now around June. It was only about half a year before the Avatar crisis. Saran didn't know what was going on in Autumnfall. The biggest inconvenience of the outer island was a blockage of information. Port Mordor could still rely on the prosperous trade to collect much information, but in Treasure Island, that was not the case. Since the situation on the mainland was changing swiftly, Saran couldn't stay here for long. That was why after completing many tasks, Saran decided it was time for him to go back to Mordor. Something important that would change his destiny would soon occur. Chapter 503 Ceremony 1. The soft sea wind blew by. George walked briskly toward the wharf. Every morning, he could buy the freshest seafood here. Now that he had established his foundation in Mordor City, he naturally needed to bring some meat back from time to time. All the seafood in Port Mordor was very cheap. The lobsters were only 3 or 5 copperderols. George quickly picked up the goods and returned to his place of residence. It was only dawn now, and after he got back, he immediately reported to the guard post. The place he stayed in was a small brick house with 2 rooms and 1 hall. Outside was a drainage ditch and a well beside it. There was a little land in the small yard. When he came out of the space to dry his clothes, he cleaned it up 2 days ago and planted some lettuce with his sister. In this way, he did not need to buy any vegetables from outside. As a civilian, although George had time to spend a lot of money, he still knew how to live a frugal life. "I am back." Her sister inside the house gestured to him to lower his voice and said gently, "Why did you get so much? What if we can't finish it?" His nephew was still sleeping. The more he looked at his nephew, the more he liked him, especially with his big black eyes and strong spirit. George believed that he would become a great man in the future. Although he joined the garrison of Mordor City and got rich rewards, whenever George wanted to persuade his sister not to go to work, she always shook her head stubbornly. She had always been a very strong woman. This may be because of how they were raised. Breakfast was porridge, salted fish, vegetables, and some overnight seafood. The garrison was in charge of his lunch and dinner. The training in Mordor City was very strict. George, as a selected elite, did not patrol the streets like the others but received very strict professional training every day. This also meant that he had more food. Even though he was also a militant previously, he did not feel like he was supporting a family. This was the responsibility of a man. This type of responsibility made him more persistent and confident. Every day, his training was twice that of the normal soldier, and he even had to do some studying. Some said they were the future generals that his lord Saran had picked out. George didn't know if this was true, but there were people being eliminated daily. He did want to be eliminated as he wanted to bring a better life for his sister. The soft prayers of her sister could be heard. For George, Lord Saran was more like a strong man he worshipped than a god he believed in. So he prayed only once in his mouth because he was just a normal believer. But this was not the case for his sister. It seemed that Lord Saran occupied a very important position in her heart. She prayed devoutly before eating and gave thanks for everything that Lord Saran had given her. Although it was not a formal prayer ceremony, every time his sister prayed, he would lower his head slightly. "Thank you, Lord Saran." It was Lord Saran that had brought us out from the chaos, war, and hunger. He has given us an opportunity to live. George found it difficult to believe in a god, but this did not affect his loyalty toward Lord Saran. Maybe it was natural for some people not to believe in gods. "Thank you, Lord Saran, for everything we have. My Lord's glory will shine forever." His elder sister stopped praying. She gently lifted her long hair with her white fingers, looked at George, and said, "Go train after eating. It's said that the one who can be selected may become an officer in the future. My little brother may become a general in the future." Faith was a normal part of her sister's life. 3 times a day, her sister would do short prayers. Every week, she would go to the temple to do a proper prayer. For her, the most important thing now was that her brother could seize this opportunity to stand out. It was a common practice in Mordor, where people prayed a few words before eating and then doing formal prayer once a week. "Relax." George smiled and said, "I'll surely do my best to pass the test." After saying that, he turned and went. As one of the selected for training, George had already achieved his target, having his own house. Now he had bigger dreams, to be someone powerful. The city was already becoming busy. Mordor was expanding every day, but the most important thing now was to build a temple belonging to Lord Saran. Here came the best craftsmen from the south coast, who were busy preparing every day, because this will be the first temple of Lord Saran in the world. Now that the foundation of the temple had been completed, George sometimes saw mysterious spellcasters who could turn earth into solid rock. This magical ability awed him. Even though the temple was not complete, the temple already had an amazing aura. Maybe it was not as magnificent as the Wealth Temple or the Sea Temple, but anyone who saw it at first sight would be impressed. There were now more people in the city of Mordor. People from Autumnfall soon got used to the order of the city. They gradually accepted the new life and integrated into it as much as possible. That was because there were hope and future here. Even the lowliest civilian yearned for a better life. George could not help but speed up his pace. There was still tough training waiting for him today. Only by sticking to it until the end could he have a better future. Raging Sand Island. The half-elf first mate looked at the document in front of him. He looked at it a few times, and murmured, "Have the orcs and the half-elves gone into a stalemate?" It seems that this Earthwalker is also a legend. Men, immediately send this report to Mordor. Since Saran left for Treasure Island, the half-elf first mate had temporarily taken over the affairs of the south coast. As a half-elf pirate that started at the bottom, he had always been careful. That was because he was not the most powerful among the pirate leaders, but the one with the most authority. From the start, he had always tried to climb to a higher position. He did not have the bloodline of giant, so everything he had was through hard training. Every pirate leader was a competitor to him. Even though Adele Isabella had gone, there were still other pirate leaders that were working hard because they knew there was something even greater. That's right. The half-elf first mate thought that Lord Saran just wanted to build a sea kingdom. He never thought Lord Saran was preparing to become a god. If Saran did become a god, then the circumstance would be different for his men. It was impossible for the gods to do everything by themselves. In the future, Lord Saran may go to the realm of gods. At that time, he would need a spokesperson for the mortals. Unlike a priest, this person would help him rule and control these pirate armies. The half-elf first mate went into deep thought. As the smartest pirate leader around, he strongly believed that he was very suitable for the job. He had enough loyalty to Lord Saran. Maybe he was not the most powerful one, but with all kinds of abilities, he believed he was more competitive than the others. Right now, the most important thing was to display himself. The military parade was an important opportunity. If he could do everything well, there was no doubt that his position in the eyes of Lord Saran would be further improved. Men. The half-elf first mate seemed to have thought of something and said, "Prepare a ship. I am going to the City of Riches, Port Tylan, Sea Temple." The Naga Siren priest stood in a pool of water behind the temple for a long time without moving. After a long time, she gave a faint sigh and said slowly, "Is the enchantment of the dragon warship finished?" A faint voice could be heard, replying, "Almost complete. Enchanted sails, dragon bone keel, fortified hull." The Naga Siren priest was unsure what to think. After some time, she said, Get someone to send it over. It seems like he wants to show his power. Never in her dreams would she think that Saran had wanted to become a god. Thinking of how previously Saran begged her to remove a curse on him, now the tides had turned. The Naga Siren priest was filled with thoughts. Chapter 504 Ceremony to a new seasonal wind brought in a storm. Many fishing boats fishing in the coastal areas had returned to the port of Mordor, and ships of marine products had been transported back, many of which would be made into salted fish and sold elsewhere. The profit of salted fish was not great. More often, salted fish was sold as a substitute for sea salt, because the weight of these salted fish was quite awesome. There were some dark clouds coming close. Probably heavy rain would be coming soon. Many merchants were busy packing things, and the fleet also stopped at the port. Sailors and workers shouted to speed up the cargo handling, as they became familiar with the weather here. They also knew that the rainstorm would come faster than they thought. The shops moved in the goods, but the tavern next door was still busy. Many pirates still lived a life of intoxication. The tavern had the best wine and prostitutes from the south coast. There were also some civilians in Mordor port. Most of them were craftsmen with skills. They could come and go freely and live the life they wanted. But there were few people who really wanted to leave at this time, because it was said that many places along the south coast were full of violent wars. People knew that many wars had been breaking out in the mainland. A cargo ship slowly docked. A middle-aged official walked toward the ship, and behind him was a 10-year-old boy. Foreign middle-sized ship. Docking fee 5 silver dirals a day. The official smiled and nodded, then stretched out his palm, and soon the captain threw a small purse toward him. The official smiled and quickly recorded, 10 silver dirals. Docking for 2 days. The boy behind him looked curiously. He only followed the official around, sometimes helping here and there. Every day the boy got 5 copper dirals. If he was lucky, he could get some bonuses. Soon, the official left because a rainstorm was coming soon. He was more or less a dignified official in Port Mordor. He was responsible for collecting the fees for the berthing of commercial ships. If he was drenched like a drowned rat, he would lose face. The sailors on the ship began to unload the cargo. Right then, 2 figures with black cloak came down from the deck. They gave a nod towards the captain and left. "Is this Mordor?" A slightly childish male voice was heard, and the silver armor under the black cloak could be seen faintly. He looked around carefully and murmured, "It's not the same as what I imagined. I thought it would be the another city of riches." The 2 looked around. An old man glanced around and said slowly, "It's really different from what we thought. The legendary pirate King Saran is a murderer, a chaotic son of fear, and a dictator. However, on our way here, whether it's Shipwreck Bay, Port Tylan, Raging Sand Island, or the city of Mordor, some of the things we have seen were very orderly. I thought the rule of pirates would be brutal and chaotic. I never thought all the things I saw along the way would be orderly and lawful. And it seems that the people under his rule, whether civilians or merchants, are better than other places." They had also witnessed what would happen to the people that broke the law. Along the way, they had seen prosperity. While the other places were filled with war and famine, the whole south coast was still normal, and people were not affected by the unrest for the time being. The civilians in these places all lived well. In a dark corner, some figures were watching the 2 men on the cargo ship. One of them said slowly, "Who are they? Do we need to report this?" "Many strange people have come to Port Mordor recently." Rogues hidden in the shadows watched on. The leader of the 2 observed for some time and replied, "They are paladins. They pose no threat to us. They'll move on after some time." Paladins were no threat to them. The 2 paladins observed everything here. The legend of Saran had been spread all over the continent, and there were all kinds of rumors about him. As the power to protect the world's justice and goodness, the paladins also noticed the legend of the rising evil pirate king, the evil Lord Saran. There were many rumors about him, but these rumors did not seem to match what they saw here, because before they came to Mordor, they thought that Saran would be a great evil, and countless people died under his hands. He controlled the south coast with cruel rule and violence, forcing others to submit to him. Before they came here, They heard a lot of rumors about him. In addition to Saran's power, there were also rumors about his extravagance and obscenity, cruelty, and cunning ways. Thus, they became extremely angry when they heard these rumors. As the guardians of justice, they hoped they could kill this evil character. However, as they got close to the south coast, the rumors they heard were different. The evil Lord Saran had become a hero-like figure, unifying pirates by means of an iron fist, and then taking this opportunity to rise rapidly, and becoming the most powerful pirate king ever. It seemed that people still said that he was ruthless, but it seems that he was not described as a devil anymore. When they got to Port Tylan, their views changed once more. The evil Lord Saran had become an idol of worship. The people believed that it was Lord Saran who had brought about the wealth of the entire coast. Now in the eyes of the people in Tylan, Saran was a great ruler. Even though they were still talking of his ruthless ways, the other rumors about Saran were nowhere to be heard. Everything was like a play. Finally, when the two paladins came to see the legendary city of Mordor, the rising miracle city of the Outer Islands. In a very short time, the city had gathered a lot of wealth and influenced the trade structure of the whole south coast. Mordor, the city of Mordor was not a city of fear or evil. The son of slaughter, the son of fear, a heartless ruler, evil and fallen. In this place called Mordor, they saw the prosperity of civilians living and trading. They saw the strict law and orderly rule. They saw a city of unprecedented civilization. Here, they couldn't see the filth and chaos of other cities or the poor refugees living in the streets. Even the lowest laborers wore complete clothes and had a healthy blush on their faces. There were voices of women and children. The sound of merchants bargaining and patrols roaming the streets. Here, they actually saw something more prosperous, energetic, and hopeful than the territory under the control of the Glory Temple. And all of this was because of an evil lord. How ironic. Chapter 505 Ceremony 3 Your Excellency, High Priest. The priests and believers on both sides of the road humbly lowered their heads and gave way to the high priest. The Shaniq Warlock appeared in a black robe with gold and silver runes. There were mysterious rune marks on the cuff of her robe and complex 9-star array on her chest. She had taken off the veil on her face, revealing a beautiful but slightly strange face, showing her non-human characteristics. The Shaniq Warlock had a stern expression. She took a glance at the people around her and said, "Go, all of you, priests, follow me into the temple." As the high priest of the temple, she presided over the whole process from designing to completion of the temple. The temple was located on the side of the central square, which was the most striking place in the center of the deciduous city. Because of spells, the structure of the whole temple was quite stable. With the improvement of Saran's power, Gloria's position in the Northern Witch Council also rose dramatically. The Witch Council wouldn't deny the chance to befriend a god, so they helped build the temple according to the standard of a witch tower. This temple was thus an impenetrable fortress. As the most important place for worship, any temple that was still in operation must have the ability to fight against legendary figures. Or else, in the future, in case of conflict, the temple must have the ability to protect its believers and priests. As the first and most important temple for Saran, the completion of the temple may require millions of durals, which may be more expensive than many wizard towers. But now, only the outline had been completed. Even though the structure of the building had been completed, the other things, such as the guidance of divinity, the writing of runes, the arrangement of arrays, and so on, had not been worked on yet. When the temple eventually complete, its aura would cover the entire island and even affect its weather. This was an enormous architectural work. Like the Temple of Riches, finally, it would need divine priests to be stationed in them. There were exquisite carvings on the walls around the temple, all of which displayed the great achievements of Saran. The half-elf craftsman carved Saran's achievements into the walls. However, only a part of which had been completed at present. A lot of space had been reserved. In the near future, they would continue to engrave Saran's achievements on the walls of the temple. Of course, Other heroes related to the temple could also be carved onto the walls. There were 72 white marble pillars that supported the temple's structural framework. They had not yet been engraved with anything but seemed to have a special meaning. The inside of the temple was spacious. In the center was a beautiful, magnificent and lifelike statue. Saran was enveloped in his cloak. He held his curved swords in both hands and looked at the distance calmly as if he was looking at the future and guarding something. The statue was only something normal right now. There was a weak divine aura on it, but it had not been fully activated. Only when the ceremony began, would Saran bring his own divinity to the statue. This statue would become the tool for Saran to accept people's faith and strengthen the link between him and his believers. Finally, Saran could use the statue to observe things. The high priest came to the statue. As she slowly knelt down, many priests behind her also knelt down. Before the ceremony began, the statue needed to gather more power. It was difficult for ordinary mortals to provide enough power of belief. But these priests were different, because they were at least devout believers, and they had a firm faith. Although believers gave a lot of faith, the priests were more important. If devout believers were like streams, then the priests would be like rivers. My Lord Saran, you're the master of all half-elves. You're the master of Mordor, the king of pirates. My Lord Saran, you're the guardian of half-elves, the pioneer shadows, the maintainer of law and order. My Lord Saran, your name will be holy among the half-elves. You led us through the crisis. You give us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Slaughter will make you stronger. The death of your enemies spreads your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, your servant will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Saran, you will raise your kingdom, making it one of the stars in the skies. With the weak prayers, the statue began to glow with divine power. This prayer would also ring when Saran becomes a god, and it will tell the world about Saran. The first line was the most important part, representing the half-elves, Mordor, and pirates. The second line was the secondary part, representing the half-elves, the rogues, and order. The third part was the core of the faith, which respectively represented the half-elves, protection, order, slaughter, death, and so on. In general, the term half-elves appeared 3 times in the entire prayer. This also represented the core divine title of Saran. Mordor and pirates were the foundation of his power, shadows were the extension of rogues, and order represented his alignment. Slaughter referred to his identity as the son of slaughter, while death was the extension of slaughter. These were all the fields Saran himself had contact, but his core field was still the half-elves. Gods had many fields. He was of the lawful alignment, so gods that were lawful good and lawful evil would accept him. In the future, he could maybe even accept the realm of lawful, or the divine title of lawful. Lawful had great power. The night was here. The Shnik warlock who officially became the high priest came to Port Mordor in a cloak. Now everything in the temple was on the right track, and the ceremony was also in preparation. Saran was becoming a true god now, unlike when the demigod vampire became a god. Saran's ceremony to become a god would be more proper. That was why there was more preparation. The vampire god slowly got his believers in the dark and didn't even have a temple. Saran would never do it like this. As Saran's representative, the high priest would also not allow that. That was why she had been busy lately. And now there was another important thing waiting for her. That was the holy emblem of the temple, representing the half-elves, representing his own divine title, which needed to be completed before the divine ceremony. The high priest was waiting for Saran to return. Chapter 506 Time for the investiture. Saran's return did not stir many people. Now that Mordor attracted the attention of many outsiders, they were either disguised as businessmen or sailors, all secretly observing this place and secretly guessing Saran. The emergence of a new god was no small matter. If it was not for the chaos on the mainland, Mordor City would become the center of the whole world and would have attracted the attention of all forces. But even if the chaos had begun to spread, there were more and more people secretly spying on Mordor, but no one dared to stand out first. After all, gods were still gods. When Saran returned to Mordor, The first thing was to go to his temple. Looking at the statue in the center of the temple, Saran felt a strange feeling. From a mortal to God, this wonderful state made him have a kind of feeling of standing in the clouds and overlooking all living beings. If he has survived the Avatar crisis safely, in the future, as long as Saran does not die, he would be able to stand in the river of history to see the flowers bloom, and the clouds were falling and rising. The immortal nature of the gods enabled him to protect the important people in his heart and enjoy a long life. No one would feel that they would not want to live. No living thing wanted to die out completely. The existence of gods would not be a boring tool. Otherwise, the Lord of Glory would not reproduce the present grain goddess with the Earth Mother. In fact, if it was not for the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, many hedonistic gods, such as the Lady of Love, the Lady of Joy, the Lady of Dancing, etc., began a new enjoyment after they answered the prayers of the believers, or sent an avatar to find new things and explore the mysteries of the multiverse. Of course, most of these gods had patrons. They belonged to a certain god system and had no great ambitions to expand their divine titles. Therefore, the joy of life was to pursue things that made them happy. Unless there was a god's war with a certain god, or there were any big actions in the god system where they were, their actual life would be very leisurely, and they would waste their endless time. Of course, there were some wonderful weirdos in the gods occasionally. They were too lazy to even respond to the prayers of the believers. There was no need to say much about the fate of such wonderful weirdos. The Lady of Dancing had a fallen time. She was addicted to forbidden happiness and even rarely responded to her believers. If she was not forcefully straightened by the other friendly gods, she would have been completely ruined by the Mistress of the Night. This was the world of the gods. There were conscientious gods, such as the Lord of Glory, the God of Justice, the God of Observation, and so on. There were also leisurely gods, such as the Lady of Love, the Lady of Dance, the Lady of Happiness, and so on. There was also the God of Exploration and the God of Traveling who were bored and liked to run around, and the God of Literacy who was immersed with the ocean of knowledge and enjoyed preserving all kinds of civilizations' information. At the same time, one would also mention the evil gods who were busy with all sorts of plots. The gods of the chaotic alignment with their own mischievous attitudes, plus the goddess of good fortune and the maid of misfortune, who were idle all day and happy-go-lucky. Finally, these two destiny Geminis were the ideal easygoing people who even responded to the prayers of believers haphazardly. They strolled along the long river of time. From time to time, the two sisters each made trouble for each other. Occasionally, they would appear in the eyes of the world but only care for what they were interested in. When the gods reached the level of the destiny Geminis, they seemed to be very free. It seemed that no one would provoke them as if they were blind, and even the mighty main gods with strong divine power would respect them. Saran also needed to complete the last step of his godly temple. That was to inject a trace of his divine consciousness into the statue in front of him. If a god was not in the mortal world, it required a huge prayer ceremony, and finally, there would be an incarnation of God, and then the whole process of opening the temple would be completed. Saran himself was still in the material plane, so he could only come in person and integrate part of his divine consciousness into the temple. From now on, as long as he wanted, he could know everything in the temple at any time. Of course, that needed to consume divine power. On the statue, a light radiance of divine power emerged, and finally, it seemed to be alive. The eyes of the sculpture were surrounded by divine power. This was the palace of gods in the mortal world. If Saran returned to the kingdom of God in the future, as long as he did not worry about consuming his divine power, he could come to the temple at any time. The investiture ceremony was almost ready. Now the last thing was the holy emblem of the temple, which also represented the emblem of Saran. The high priest dared not make his own decision, and finally still had Saran make his own decision. The emblem of the gods had special meaning, but it could not be too complicated to the extent people could not recognize, as it would not be convenient for believers to walk in the world, but it could not be unintelligent either. It was better to recognize the insignia at first glance and that it was imperceptibly fierce and had a strong demeanor. The emblem. Saran could not help thinking about what kind of emblem he should use to represent himself. Abyss, shadow, slaughter, half-elves, rogues, pirates. Saran had seen many emblems. But when it came to making one for himself, it inevitably turned a little difficult for him. But he was not a man who liked to be tangled, so he soon had a plan. The black land, mixed with the dark red tone, represented the breath of the abyss. The grey shadow, moving forward during the slaughter. He walked in the turbulent year of chaos. Saran looked up at the statue in front of him and soon found inspiration. Under the influence of divine power, he directly changed the material and quickly formed a badge. On the black and barren land with mottled blood, there was a grey shadow around. The figure of a rogue was shrouded in the cloak. His eyes were calmly looking at the distance as if he was looking at the future, as if he was guarding something. A very simple badge. At one glance, one would also be impressed. It was easily recognizable. And there was also a kind of unidentified and fierce demeanor. The only drawback was that it could not be seen that it had a very obvious relationship with the half-elven divine title, but Saran did not seem to care much about this, because he made the emblem on behalf of himself. For him, the half-elves were just his divine title, but they could not represent all of him. Moreover, from the perspective of a figure, Saran himself could easily recognize the characteristics of half-elves. If someone carefully observed this emblem, it was easy to see that Saran's ambition was not on the half-elves. Shadows, slaughter, the breath of death. The whole emblem gave people a feeling of suppression, as if they were looking at the future and seeing some terrifying scenes. Like guardians keeping watch while walking in the shadows and slaughterings. Saran completed the emblem with his divine power and finally injected his own power. After a careful look, he nodded with satisfaction. The expression of the high priest nearby was rather strange, and the corners of his mouth were drawn a little. There were few gods who directly used themselves as emblems. In the past, there was one, the Dark Maiden. Her emblem was the Drow maidens who were naked and wielding silver swords under the full moon. Now that she has already fallen, and the emblem made by Saran could not help but remind the high priest of that god, so she could not help twitching at the corners of her mouth. The Dark Maiden was a kind yet tragic god. But the owner was the existence of the evil order. The emblem he chose might have a special meaning. A week passed in a flash. When the half-elves' temple was completed, the time for Saran to become a god was coming. The whole Mordor city was in intense preparation, and countless eyes were looking at the outer islands. A large number of believers began to gather. They held a prayer ceremony every day to let the power of faith gather in the temple. The priests put on new robes and quietly bathed and changed, waiting for the moment when Lord Saran became God. They would be baptized again. Saran would bestow them divine spells after the ascension into a god. At that time, the traces of the original god of half-elves and rogues left on them would be completely erased. They served only one master, a god of faith. That was Saran. The light of the morning fell. The regular sound of prayers reverberated over the Mordor city. Tens of thousands of half-elves gathered near the square, surrounded the temple, and waited for the holy moment to come. This day, Lord Saran had the throne up high ready for the investiture. Chapter 507 Prayers. My Lord Saran, you are the master of half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. My Lord Saran, you are the patron of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. My Lord Saran, your name will be holy among the half-elves. You have led us through the crisis. You gave us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Slaughtering will make you stronger. The death of enemies spreads your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, your servants will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Saran, you will belong to your kingdom high up, to be the stars in the sky. The orderly sound of prayers reverberated over the Mordor city. Tens of thousands of believers gathered around the temple. There were countless prying eyes in the dark. As long as they were not close to the core area of Mordor city, the hidden guards would not expel them. At this moment, the sky was still dark. It was not long before dawn. Saran's chosen timing surprised many people. He did not choose the afternoon, evening, or dusk. He did not like to live in the dark like other evil gods. The time he chose to ascend into a god was daybreak, the last darkness before dawn. No one knew why Saran chose this timing. Maybe only he had the answer in his heart. My Lord Saran, you are the master of half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. My Lord Saran, you are the patron of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. My Lord Saran, your name will be holy among the half-elves. You have led us through the crisis. You gave us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Slaughtering will make you stronger. The death of enemies spreads your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, your servants will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Saran, you will belong to your kingdom high up, to be the stars in the sky. The second prayer sounded. With the faint divine brilliance, the priests knelt down in the temple one by one, and then countless believers knelt down under the black pressure. The vast sea of people knelt down at his feet. The high priest stood in front of Saran's statue and looked down at everything. A strange brilliance appeared in her eyes. In a moment, a powerful spiritual energy field shrouded the whole square and connected the hearts of countless people. Shanic energy field. Every sentence of the prayer turned into a torrent, connecting the hearts of all people. Devout faith shook the hearts of others. At this moment, even some wavering believers were fully integrated into it. At this moment, the power of the Shanics converged. They felt the heart of others, the power of faith, the sustenance of spirit, and the sense of security after being protected. My Lord Saran, you are the master of half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. My Lord Saran, you are the patron of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. My Lord Saran, your name will be holy among the half-elves. You have led us through the crisis. You gave us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Slaughtering will make you stronger. The death of enemies spreads your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, your servants will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Saran, you will belong to your kingdom high up, to be the stars in the sky. The third prayer sounded. Intangibly, in the beginning, some uneven voices gradually integrated into a whole. If the first prayer was a messy movement, then the second prayer was a melody directed by people. When the third prayer sounded, tens of thousands of people turned into a whole. All the voices were unified. Tens of thousands of hearts were integrated by faith, religion and spiritual power, and a very strong force of faith broke out in an instant, and every word they uttered became full of power. The powerful divine words resounded over the island of Mordor. Even the space nearby was trembling. The last touch of darkness disappeared, and the morning light appeared in the sky. It was the light of dawn. There was dazzling holy light in the sky of Mordor city. At this moment, the whole temple erupted with powerful divine power. A light column rose from the statue and pierced the space into the sky in an instant. Stars appeared. At the last moment of darkness, a dim star suddenly burst into a glorious brilliance. Its light fell over the Mordor city, enveloping the whole city in the light. The hearts of countless people were peaceful as if they felt an eternal peaceful kingdom. Their hearts were shrouded by force, and the unprecedented shock spread into everyone's hearts. My Lord Saran, you are the master of half-elves. You are the master of Mordor. You are the king of pirates. The same sounds came from the sky. It was like the echo of tens of thousands of believers in Mordor city. But it was coming from the bright sky over Mordor city as if it came from the clouds from the other worlds. My Lord Saran, you are the patron of the half-elves. You are the forerunner in the shadows. You are the keeper of order. Arendelle, royal palace. The figure of the elder princess appeared on the tower in an instant. She seemed to have just woken up, wearing crystal blue pajamas. The elder princess looked at the outer islands with solemn eyes. In the last dark moments before the dawn, a star in the distance suddenly became as dazzling as the moon, illuminating a corner of the sky and spreading its brightness in a certain place. Uninvestiture. The Chang princess slowly closed her eyes, and she could hear countless prayers, echoing in the sky again and again, and it was spreading throughout the entire material plane. This was a sign of the birth of a true God. Me Lord Saran, your name will be holy among the half-elves. You have led us through the crisis. You gave us a stable and orderly life. You are a wise ruler. Slaughtering will make you stronger. The death of enemies spreads your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, your servants will be reborn in your kingdom. North Tower. The most powerful witch in the legends, the Eye of the North, has been standing on the astrological platform for a long time. She looked at the dazzling stars in the distance. Her pale pupils seemed to have seen everything and saw what had happened in Modor City. A true God was about to be born. Every time the prayer resounded, it was all to accumulate strength for him. When the strength of this faith was strong enough, it would be the moment when he raised the throne high up in the sky. Prayers were still echoing. Saran's entire body was undergoing dramatic changes. Countless forces of faith were pouring into his body, and countless complex data were emerging. God's template was forming. But his power was not enough. He needed more prayers, more faith, more divine power. With the time of the investiture arriving, his prayers spread all over the world, and also into the ears of other gods. At this moment, in countless planes, in the whole multiverse, many high beings have turned their eyes to this place, to an island that was not noticeable in the material plane. A true God was about to be born. From the gods in heaven to the hells of Bata, the bottomless abyss, the gods, demons, devils, underlords, elementals, demigod-liches, the countless powerful people all felt the emergence of a new God. This was the power of a true God. No matter what, it could not be covered up because this was a true God that was recognized by the multiverse. Chapter 508 Raise the Throne. Rows of data were popping up in front of his eyes. The God's template is being transformed. Extracting the power of faith. Connecting the faith kingdom. Drawing the power of the kingdom of God. The power of faith is resonating simultaneously. God's template has been launched. Assembling the faith connections. Conversion of the power of faith. Divine power injection. The power of the kingdom of God is injecting at the same time. Temporary access to divine form. Connected to the kingdom of God. Transforming yourself into divine form. In front of Saran's eyes, there were countless data streaming. If it was in the past, I'm afraid his brain would have exploded before. But now he could easily bear all of this and quickly completed the whole transforming process. A strange brilliance emerged from his body. His entire body was automatically suspended in midair, and the surrounding space was assimilated by him, just like the power of the law where his body was located has been mastered by him. This was the true power of the gods and the reason why most of them could only stay in their kingdom. The divine form was the embodiment of the power of law. At this moment, Saran felt the unprecedented power, which was the power of twisting the space just by waving his hands. His figure appeared directly in the sky of the temple, without any actions of casting. A great power enveloped the whole island of Modor. The people that were spying in the dark trembled involuntarily. This was the pressure of a true God, which shocked one's soul more than the dragon power of an ancient dragon. God is gracious. The power of God is like a prison. Everything was under the control of Saran. None of the rats peeping in the dark could escape his sight. This moment he was the true God. At this moment, as a God, it seemed that he could kill anything at will. But, precious divine power should not be wasted here. The power from the tens of thousands of believers that were praying was diminishing, and the power to connect to the kingdom of God to feed back divine power was getting weaker. Saran must accomplish the most important thing at this moment. The brilliance of the morning had already appeared. But Saran's figure descended over the temple. He stood in the white light rising from the statue, and his entire body was covered by a divine light. The darkness behind him was about to disappear, and the light of dawn was rising. At this moment, Saran's back burst out an overwhelming brilliance from thin air. A god's light was illuminating the sky as if for a moment. It was the noon sun where light was everywhere. It was like an important signal. The high priest appeared on the platform of the temple in an instant, and a cohesive storm of Shanneks spread, enveloping all believers in front of him and gathering all the power of the Shanneks to form brilliant support at Saran's feet. Me Lord Saran, you will belong to your throne high up, rise to the sky. Me Lord Saran, you will belong to your throne high up, rise to the sky. Me Lord Saran, you will belong to your throne high up, rise to the sky. After all the prayers, it was left with this last one. The power of the whole temple, the prayers of countless believers, the feedback from the kingdom of God, all the power has been gathered on Saran. At this moment, he was as dazzling as the stars. With the divine words of the prayer that even made space tremble, a part of a soul appeared in Saran's body. All the power has been gathered on this part of the soul. In a moment, he was like a star lit by people, directly across the night and rising towards the sky. Raise the throne, rise to the sky. At this most important moment, a huge power emerged from the sea temple in Port Modor. Then the sea near the port suddenly formed a whirlpool. With the violent waves of the sea, a goddess holding a trident appeared on the sea. Sea goddess. The sea priest, who had been watching Saran's investiture coldly, was shocked to death. Then they knelt down on the ground one by one, and the believers belonging to the sea temple knelt down on the ground under the pressure of darkness, devoutly greeting the incarnation of the sea goddess. But the sea goddess did not care about the believers at all. She did not even look at them. Her figure soared directly into the sky. The incarnation of the sea goddess, holding a trident, presided over the city of Modor. Standing in the clouds, she looked at all this as if she was witnessing Saran's investiture, and as if she was intimidating some enemies for him. The first one to witness Saran's investiture had appeared with the god's incarnation. A star appeared in the sky. Some kind of light could be seen rising in the distance. For the rest of the world, tonight was just simply having a star that was very bright. It was not as shocking as the night when the demigod vampire's ascension when he dyed the moon red. But for some other powerful beings in the world, what they saw on this day was more shocking than what the demigod vampire had done. Saran was very low. The sacred and spectacular view of Modor City only appeared in Modor City. Unless someone used a powerful spell to observe this place, the people in other places could only see a bright star in the sky. That was it. The divine prayer shook the space and could be heard and felt by any legendary level existences. So many powerful spellcasters soon turned their sights over. A new god had appeared. It seemed that there were opportunities for them. However, they soon saw a terrifying existence that made people's heart thump, and their hands tremble. Sea goddess, greater divine power. Many people have heard so much about the deeds of this evil goddess. Her moodiness, her evilness, her destructive anger, everything about this evil goddess were as unpredictable as the sea. Although the sea goddess gradually integrated the soft and broad side of the sea, and integrated more of the characteristics of the sea into herself, and even wanted to touch the life domain, her alignment gradually shifted from chaotic evil to neutral evil. But there was no doubt that she was still a powerful evil god that many people were absolutely unwilling to provoke. The sea goddess's sight locked onto Saran. But she was also looking at the Amazonian rainforest, where a storm seemed to be brewing in the sky, as if some equally powerful presence had accidentally discovered a new god next door after a nap. Although it was only recently that she has advanced to the greater divine power, for the sea goddess who held on to the powerful fields such as destruction, sea and evil, other gods who had already possessed the greater divine power did not make her feel any fear, because she was the embodiment of the sea. Her anger could make waves directly submerge any kingdom on the mainland. The storm gradually calmed down. The distant Amazonian rainforest has been restored to its original state as if the storm clouds had never appeared before. Saran's soul was rising in the air. All his spiritual consciousness was in the soul, which was separated. He had a more important mission to complete. A golden radiance emerged, built over the Temple of Riches in the most prosperous area of Port of Modor. The statue of the Lady of Riches showed a dazzling brilliance, and then a corporal figure stood up. She was wearing a gorgeous long skirt, and her cloak emitted a brilliant golden brilliance. Her entire body looked golden and had a kind of beauty and luxury that people could not look at directly. Her holy breath spread. With a thump in his heart, Jinn priest quickly led the believers to kneel down to welcome the incarnation of the goddess of riches. The figure of the Lady of Riches rose into the air. She stood on the other side of Modor city with a golden scepter in her hand. Her figure stood in the clouds and stared at everything. She was far away from the sea goddess. When the two goddesses looked at each other, they seemed to have flashed the sparks of collision. The second one to witness Saran's investiture had appeared with the god's incarnation. Goddess of riches, great divine power. The spying eyes in the dark suddenly thumped again. The goddess of riches might not be the most powerful god, but she was definitely the wealthiest god. For such a super golden thigh, it was good for anyone to even hug it. This time, many people's hearts have been beating to retreat because the backup of the new god seemed to be quite sturdy. One was a greater divine power, another was great divine power, one was evil and willful, the other was quite rich. Regardless of how one looked on, he seemed to be a hard idea anyway. However, at this time, all of a sudden, a strange light laugh emerged. In a faint way, it seemed that a black goddess's incarnation had appeared. In a blink, both the sea goddess and the Lady of Riches turned their eyes to that direction. Then a little shock appeared on their faces. At the same time, the two goddesses bent slightly to show their respect for the mysterious existence. The third one to witness Saran's investiture had appeared with the god's incarnation. The Maid of Misfortune, great divine power. Some people that were spying at Modor in the dark were almost scared till they peed for a moment. Some of the casters were so scared till their hands trembled. The crystal balls as tools were smashed on the ground. Some of them were quite powerful, and might not be afraid of the sea goddess, and might not be afraid of the Lady of Riches. But they could never ignore the legendary Maid of Misfortune. The power of fate was so elusive. Even the gods above knew how to maintain respect for destiny. Geminis on the surface. 3 incarnations of gods had appeared. For anyone who has witnessed the existence of Saran, this moment had a very profound significance. The divine brilliance rose, just like a dazzling meteor rising from the ground to the sky. Countless people could see this brilliance. But for ordinary people, there were not many that knew what it really represented. Chapter 509, True God, Saran. What was the most important thing in the investiture ceremony? Advancing oneself into a godly state. Learning how to turn the power of faith into divine power. Mastering how to bestow divine spells onto believers. Or establishing a kingdom that belonged to God. No. These were not the most important. The most important thing was to enter the legendary Pantheon. Raise the throne. Rise to the sky. The soul that belonged to Saran was directly transformed into the godly incarnation of pure energy state, rising towards the sky like a bright star amongst the praying voices of tens of thousands of believers. Time and space were not distances. The soul had crossed the boundary of the material plane as if it had passed through a solid crystal wall and stood in the starry void. But this was not the point. A sacred gate opened in front of Saran. The radiance of holiness came forth. An angel's figure appeared in front of him. A black and a white figure came out of the void. Holy sacred angel, and an evil fallen angel. They were the most ancient group of angels. They were also the most powerful godly creations that had survived for a long time. Now that they had not been involved in other things in the universe for a long time, their only task now was to guard Pantheon. The 2 ancient angels were silent. They looked at Saran with their eyes, then leaned slightly to pay homage to a true god, and then opened a gate through the void. It was a huge temple that could not be described by words. It was the core of the multiverse. It was a more mysterious place than the legendary sigil because only gods had the right to enter this place. This was the ruling core of the whole multiverse. Saran nodded a little, then stepped into the front door. When he entered the Pantheon, the knowledge that countless gods should have, poured into his mind, which was the power of the most ancient law imprinting. No one knew when the Pantheon was born, but in the knowledge of the gods, From the birth of the oldest gods, the pantheon already existed. Like the most ancient memory of Obirith, they were awakened in chaos and descended onto the present multiverse. The pantheon was very quiet. This was a huge space. All the things one saw in front of them was covered with a curtain of light, which the gods could not see through. One by one, each throne was placed in the pantheon. Saran could see a lot of figures in his eyes. They sat quietly in the same place and paid no attention to his coming. These were the incarnations of the gods. It was also a part of their soul. Any true god would send a part of his soul to the pantheon, as long as they did not completely fall. The throne belonging to them in the pantheon would remain. Not many ancient gods would pay attention to a new god who was just born, much less a minor divine power new god. They would remain on their thrones, fight against the coming crisis. Natural god system, elemental god system, human god system, elven god system, dwarven god system, half-human god system, drow god system. Order alignment, neutral alignment, chaotic alignment, good alignment, evil alignment. The distribution of the pantheon seemed to have a law that he did not know. Through the induction in the dark, Saran found his position in a moment. It was at the back of the gap between the human god system and the elven god system. Near the far left corner of the pantheon, there was a seat belonging to Saran, which was engraved with his emblem and showed the divine power that he possessed. Minor divine power. One of the weakest gods in the whole pantheon. There was no god system, and the half-elf race only had one god, and no definite allies, because only when one became a god could they formally form an alliance. So, Saran had an independent place, an independent space, even if he was in the corner of the pantheon. But if he chose to join one of the gods, then his throne would move to another space. These separated curtains of light were actually spaced one by one, which was larger than what the eyes could see. The position of the gods was not always the same. They maintained the normal operations of the whole multiverse. In fact, there would be slight changes in these thrones every 1,000 years or so. There were gods falling and gods rising, but most of the changes appeared at the back of the pantheon, belonging to the elemental god system, the natural god system, and the position of many main gods, which has not changed for a long time. Last time, there was a dramatic change. The throne, which belonged to Spider God, appeared directly in the front of the pantheon. Her throne has been moved to the row of main gods of god systems. It was unknown whether it was intentional or unintentional. Sitting opposite her was her former husband, the ruler of the elven god system, Elven Lord. This couple really had bad luck. Saran sat on his own throne, and in a moment, the space around him began to expand into a large hayplain. It was empty, because Saran did not have any allies, nor belonged to any god systems. Vaguely, Saran felt three gazes, and they expressed their goodwill towards him, which were from the sea goddess, the Lady of Riches, and the Maid of Misfortune. These three gods witnessed his investiture. Naturally, when Saran entered the pantheon, they noticed him for the first time. If it was any other time, the appearance of a new god might attract the eyes of many gods. But now, the prelude of the Avatar's crisis was about to break out. There were not many gods who would turn their attention to such small matters. Saran took his seat. A curtain of light rose around him, and a corporal figure appeared in the pantheon, which seemed to be no different from other gods sitting on their thrones. The power of law flowed into the body. In the dark, Saran seemed to have understood some power belonging to the rules of the universe, but he seemed to be unable to fully understand it. The investiture was completed. When Saran's soul settled in Pantheon, all the priests felt a sense in their hearts, because they suddenly regained their divine spells. Although they only recovered to the third grade of divine spells, it was of special significance to them. Lord Saran has just completed the investiture ceremony, and his accumulated divine power was not large enough. However, as long as they could pass this period of time, Lord Saran would be able to bestow higher-level divine spells. Their power was recovering. Saran slowly opened his eyes, and the stars in the sky representing the half-elven kingdom were dim again. At the time when the Avatar's crisis was about to break out, Saran could not and did not have the ability to return to the godly kingdom, but he had a connection with the godly kingdom because it was the half-elf kingdom. Although it has been very weak, almost crumbling, but it still retained a part of its foundations. The godly kingdom gave Saran quite a bit of divine power. Otherwise, if he wanted to raise his throne to the sky, it would definitely not be as easy as now. The investiture ceremony was completed. The figure of the Maid of Misfortune gradually disappeared in the sky, leaving only a faint laugh. The Lady of Riches looked at Saran, then she nodded to Saran, and then turned into a golden light and slowly dissipated. The god with great divine power was not very powerful. She was not willing to waste too much of her divine power when the coming of the Avatar's crisis was nearing. The only one left in the sky was the sea goddess. The evil goddess smiled at Saran, then raised her trident and pointed to the sea temple. Since the establishment of Port Modor, all the great divine powers gathered have been crazily operating and even extracted the power from some other places in the sea. She looked down at everything in front of her eyes and said in a majestic voice, "This city will have 3 years' worth of fish harvest." Oracle, divine words. The holy voice reverberated over the city of Modor. At last, a huge divine power erupted, and even the surrounding space trembled, all the way to the deep sea. The figure of the sea goddess disappeared slowly. Saran's figure stayed in the midair and bowed slightly towards her disappearing position to express his respect and thanks. This was the goodwill of the gods. The sea goddess expressed her goodwill and told Saran that she was more generous and willing to cooperate with him than the other 2 goddesses. Maybe it was because Saran expanded her faith. Or maybe it was because Saran had the pirate domain. Or maybe it was because they both belonged to the evil alignment. It was hard to guess what the gods thought, but her actions deserved respect and gratitude. Saran's figure slowly descended. At the last step of the investiture ceremony, the figure of the high priest appeared in front of the statue. She knelt down in front of the statue and humbly expressed her respect and love. Saran put his hand gently on her head, and then a powerful divine power burst out. Then he took out a scepter that symbolized the supreme power of the half-elf temple, poured his own divine power into it continuously, and finally handed it into the hands of the high priest. Divine right of kings. From now on, the high priest was the supreme ruler of the half-elf temple. As god, Saran would gradually live in the background. Many of his things needed to be handled by his spokesman in the world, because this was the hidden rule of the gods. Saran's figure gradually disappeared. There was a divine light over the statue as if he was looking at everything. Before the temple, Glory to me Lord. And we shall be reborn in the Holy Kingdom. The cheers echoed all over the world. In order to celebrate the ascension of me Lord Saran, the city of Modor would hold a 7-day celebration of joy. This city also had its first festival of its own. Chapter 510 God's Template. What are you worried about? The figure of the fallen witch Corinne appeared outside the door. She looked at her daughter in front of her and said slowly, "Are you afraid that he will change when he becomes a god?" Gloria turned and looked at her mother. She was always noble and elegant and had a superior temperament. At the moment, she looked a little flustered. She did not answer her mother's question but just clenched the staff in her hand. What made her uneasy was not only many rumors about gods, but also the gap between her and Saran. She liked her current life very much. It was a peaceful yet sweet life. She was worried that all these things would be changed because of the investiture. When she first saw Saran, he was just an unremarkable small thief. But now, in such a short time, he had become the king of pirates who ruled the vast seas. He had tens of thousands of troops. He was the only master of Modor City. Now he was a powerful god, the patron of half-elves. Even Gloria's position in the Witch Council today has been continuously elevated because of Saran, and she has become the manager next to the Honorable Eye of the North. It was all because she was the mistress of Modor, the only woman Saran had on the table. Sometimes, she would also think about what was chasing after him, which had made Saran so desperate again and again, but she also knew that Saran did not want to say it, so she could only stand behind him silently and support him, and speed up her own pace as much as possible. In fact, Saran's heart also had its own pride. Now that she was a legendary spellcaster, arguably the most talented witch in the north for hundreds of years, but it was still far from Saran. She was a little uneasy. She did not know where she would go in the future. She was more worried about the increasing gap between her and Saran, a god high up above. Although many spellcasters were praised as having divine-like power, they also knew that compared with the real gods, the gap between them as mortals was still huge. She would not say it all, because she was Gloria, the most dazzling pearl in the north. But she could not hide it from her mother. It might be that they were connected by flesh and blood, or they both had a similar feeling. He is the most determined man I have ever seen. The fallen witch, Corinne, came to her daughter's side. She reached out and held Gloria's hand, slowly said, "Such a man. It's impossible to lose himself because of the power of the gods. Although I sometimes don't know what he is still afraid of and what he is preparing for, he knows that he may see even farther than us." Speaking of this, the fallen witch silently added, "One can still bear it in that case." If she did not see her daughter come out tender and alluring every morning, she sometimes doubted if Saran was even interested in women or not. The existence of gods was special. People have limited knowledge of them. As witches, they had also researched the gods. For example, the gods had their own desires. Even many gods liked to be happy. Gods would also breed, but sometimes they would produce forbidden spawns. Many types of research on gods had been carried out in wizard organizations for many years. One of the interesting points was that many gods might have some mental distortions due to the changes of perspective, or for other reasons. For example, the god of murder almost killed himself because he was disturbed by its divine power, divine title, divinity, and so on. Saran always insisted on eliminating the other consciousness within the divinity and took his own will as the core to integrate the power. That is, he was worried that he would be influenced by some other god's power. This was a very complicated thing. But the most fundamental thing was the collision between the wills. Only the wills as strong as steel could not be affected by any external influence. Saran's figure appeared in the room. When he saw the fallen witch, Corinne was also here. He could not help but a little stunned, then nodded slightly. "Is it over?" The fallen witch looked at Saran with a smile. She did not know why. The smile seemed a little awkward. Gloria also turned around and looked over with some emotion. She felt that Saran had not changed much. Then, she was relieved a little. No matter the surface or mutual feeling, Saran has not changed much. The biggest change was his gaze, which was like a deep sea of stars, making people seem to sink into it. This was the gaze of divinity. Unless it was deliberately concealed, it was a special ability. Saran seemed to understand what they were worried about. He shook his head and smiled. "Things are not as you think. The divinity I have attained has erased the original will and will not have any impact on me. But after the integration of the divine title, there's still a limit. To a god, a divine title was like a job. One could be lazy and absent from work occasionally, but if one did not do it at all, one would have to pay for it. There was a magic power over the city of Modor. Saran's perception has been multiplied many times, and the ability 10 feet telepathy that he had has been advanced into 100 feet telepathy. If a believer prayed in his god's name, he could feel it too. But if he wanted to know everything, that would consume his divine power. Now, his god's template has been formed. This was another template. God's name, God of the Half-Elves, Saran. God system, none. Level, minor divine power. Emblem, Shadow Watcher. Residential area, material plane. Alignment, evil order. Divine title, half-elf, rogue. Domain, half-elves, rogues, pirates. Believers, half-elves, pirates, rogues, adventurers, etc. Priest's alignment, neutral good, neutral order, evil order, neutral evil. Note, chaotic alignment would automatically have exclusions. Preferred weapon, curved sword. God's template looked simple, but in fact, it contained a lot of meanings. Many aspects represented the core abilities of God. Although Saran was ascended as a half-elf, he had the divine title of a rogue, so his followers were quite wide. including half-elves, pirates, rogues, and adventurers. The most easily attracted believers were the half-elves, whose belief would not be affected throughout spreading within the half-elves. Believers in a chaotic alignment could believe in the gods of the order alignment. However, it was difficult for a priest in a chaotic alignment to become a priest of the gods in the order alignment. The final result was that the priest would transform his own alignment into the alignment needed by the gods. Saran's alignment of the priests with divine spells was neutral good, neutral order, evil order, and neutral evil. Do not ask why he could have a neutral good priest, because Saran himself did not quite understand. He was just a new god. Many things have not been fully understood. However, his ability to accept the priests of the neutral good alignment might be related to the environment of Modor City. At least, Modor was not considered very evil. Such strict ruling was only to deal with the coming Avatar's crisis. So it was no surprise that the situation in Modor City accepted neutral good priests. As for the good order alignment, it would be very unlikely. Lastly, it was the weapon that Saran was good at. The gods had special abilities. They could bestow their disciples and priests the weapon they were good at as a kind of gifted ability. That is to say, they could automatically acquire the basic skills of using the curved sword to fight. In the future, as long as it was Saran's priest, they could get an extra bonus effect when mastering the curved sword's fighting skills. But the specific amount of understanding would depend on personal abilities. This is the basic abilities of a god's template. And most importantly, it could help Saran deal with the prayers of believers, including responding to the connections of devout believers, and automatically bestowing divine spells to the priests who believed in him. It was like a huge information processor. Saran would automatically receive all the prayers and convert the power of faith, and if something important happened, he would get additional message alerts. For example, some believers found the conspiracy of the gods in the enemy alignments and wanted to tell them using prayers and also to pray for guidance, or the birth of a new priest, who needed his first response to bestow divine spells and so on. For these sorts of important things, Saran could know them first and deal with them in time. For those ordinary daily prayers, God's template would help him to filter them automatically. Needless to say, with this ability, he felt that the responsibilities after the investiture were much simpler. At least, he did not need to do everything himself.